Getting it real with RealChunWai on the hottest topics, frank, engaging and candid. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Over 700,000 new voters will play a decisive role in the coming Johor state elections. What does it mean to Umno, the major party in the Barisan Nasional? Our guest is Shahril Hamdan, the Umno Information Chief. Please welcome Shahril Hamdan. Good evening, Malaysia and followers from around the world. Our guest tonight, the tamu khas malam ini ialah Shahril Hamdan. Shahril is the Information Chief of Umno and the Vice Chairman of the party's youth wing. He was a policy officer to YB Khairuddin Jamaluddin for 2 years. He graduated in economics at the University of Manchester and completed his master's degree in race ethnicity and post-colonial studies from the prestigious London School of Economics and Political Science. He is regarded as an upcoming politician in UMNO and a man to watch. He's a fresh face. Please welcome Shahril Hamdan.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Shahril, let's get the conversation moving. Now, UMNO is one of the oldest party in Malaysia. I think it's 76 years old. It has been the main component party of the Alliance and then Barisan Nasional. And as it is an old party, how does UMNO intend to make itself, rejuvenate itself, to remake itself, to reboot itself, to make it more attractive to the younger voters? Especially now, we have in Johor, at least 700,000 voters, the under the 18 and those above 21 who have yet to be registered. This is a big figure. And how does UMNO plans to make itself attractive to these voters?
Yeah, I think the challenge of regeneration is a big one for all parties, but especially for a party as old as UMNO and our friends in Barisan as well. So that challenge has always been there, and it's become more acute with recent numbers of new voters, especially the young ones who now enter the electorate. So that's definitely a constant conversation within the party. How we have approached it, I think, is in typical Barisan, typical UMNO style, which is to do it very deliberately but gradually. So it's not something that has shocked the status quo. It's something that is done in true UMNO fashion, where we balance both the tradition that has given the party the strength it has for the past decades, but also a track record of being willing to do changes and to do bold transformations where required. So give you a couple of specific examples. I think the Malacca state election is an example where for the first time, definitely in memory, but probably for the first time ever, we were able to feel so many fresh faces that represented different age groups, not just 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, also some more sort of middle-aged politicians, but fresh faces, which countered the narrative or the perception that UMNO is very difficult to change, and the same people are always fielded. So we were able, in that case, to show that no, UMNO is not as rigid as is portrayed. So that's one part, the kind of faces that we put forward. Not to speak of myself, but just as an example, the fact that the party president and the Supreme Council was willing to appoint, take a gamble and appoint at that time 33-year-old in me to be information head. It's not something small. So that was a brave move and a risk that they were willing to take. Various other examples where people have been promoted to positions of influence inside the party. But we are also aware it's not just about who you put, it's also the kind of issues you bring and the kind of ways that you articulate your position and your arguments. And I think even on that front, UMNO and Barisan has shown, including the months that we were in opposition, that we were still able to articulate the concerns of the rakyat in a way that was compelling, and it wasn't so old school or traditional to the point where we were not relatable anymore. So on those both, face and substance, there is a gradual but clear regeneration inside the way UMNO and BN does things.
Shahril, you're 31 years old, right?
I'm 36 now.
Oh, 36, okay. Now, when you joined UMNO, what prompted you to join UMNO? UMNO has always been seen to be like a party which is dominated by people who have been in the party for a long time. The division leaders do not want to let go of their positions. They have a lot of influence in deciding who should be the calon. And at one point, the Ketua Perhubungan Negeri was very powerful, but now it's actually that power seems to have been diminished. And these some people would describe these people as warlords. Joining UMNO and as a young person, do you find difficulties moving around? And does the other young people have that kind of problems? Or UMNO recognize that change and allows younger people to now move up the ladder without affecting and disrupting the whole structure and leadership?
We're getting better. We're not there yet, if you ask me, in the sense that there's a systemic challenge for anyone young entering UMNO, especially if you come from a quote unquote professional background. And for example, the way UMNO politics is done, the way Malay politics is done, is still requires a lot of face time. Still requires a lot of touch on the ground, which obviously is an ingredient in our politics that will never go away. In the past, however, I think a lot of young professionals were penalized in the sense that you will never be able to have the same kind of face time and the same kind of ground touch as someone who doesn't have a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 9 job. You know how it is when you're in the early 20s and you work in the private sector, for example. You can't really be hanging out to 1 or 2 a.m. every weekday and go to work fresh the next day at 8 o'clock, right? So those kind of systemic challenges still exist, but I think UMNO right now is a bit more open. To have a mix of backgrounds and profiles, which they can recognize the merits of in different forms and in different ways. So that has that I've seen in my decade plus inside the party in some form or another has changed for the better.
I'm trying to understand when we talk about young voters, Undi 18. I'm trying to understand the Malay mind, okay, the Malay category. Obviously, that it is not uniform. It has got many segments. Whether they are those who support the Malay nationalist, Malay rights thing, and then of course those who much more conservative prefer the Islamic style. And then perhaps in a much smaller way, the liberal and progressive. How do you categorize this the Malay young minds?
So I hesitate to give an overarching absolutist definition. You are correct that it's very diverse. You no longer have a singular Malay you no longer have a singular Malay political identity. And that's something that I inside UMNO try and persuade my colleagues about, because maybe in the past, however different the Malay community was, and it was always diverse, right? We sometimes romanticize as if it was always one. But perhaps there was more uniformity in terms of the political identity, what was important and what wasn't so important. But now I think in the 21st century, you have the Malay condition is so much more diverse, and the experiences that we go through can be very different, and sometimes more similar with other ethnic communities as well. But at the same time, I think there is, and if you're talking about young voters especially, including Malay voters, there are a few strands of thinking and a few strands of opinions that I think sort of unify this group. Not completely, not 100%, but for the large part. So I think a couple of things. One, there is no loyalty the same kind of loyalty is not there anymore with any one party. And when you talk about Malay voters, obviously you always thought it was UMNO. I don't think we can expect young Malay voters who are just out of school in their 20s to have the same kind of emotional attachment with any single party, whether it's UMNO, whether it's PAS. I don't think that I think that time has passed. Obviously, we will still, welcome anyone who has that feelings, but we do that with the recognition that the broader public maybe sees it quite differently, sees politics quite differently now. So the loyalty to any single party is no longer there. They're willing to change votes depending on the election cycle and all the rest of it. So that's one thing that characterizes the young voters. The second thing I think is also therefore a focus on economic issues and what any party can offer them and their family, not in terms of handouts, but in terms of what kind of life and what kind of future do I see myself having and my family having with any given political configuration. So that's the other thing that I think is a characteristic. Thirdly, and this may be of interest also as we proceed with our conversation, while they still have strong ties to their ethnic identity and obviously religious identity, I think even among young Malay voters, there's more of a class lens now.
I see,
So, they're not just looking after themselves and their families, but there's a solidarity among young Malay voters about economic justice and economic injustice. And that cuts across and no longer can be defined purely in terms of the ethnic racial lens, So I think that's a trend that UMNO will have to be very wary of and very careful of. So how we manage that and how we connect to that, I think is going to be important. Maybe a couple other things before I go on too long. Issues that are not economic matter to them as well: governance, integrity. That's always been the case with young voters, but with this cohort and with this generation, I think it's even more important to them. Very related to the previous one about justice, about economic justice, also then relates to issues of governance, integrity, and the attendant issues. And lastly, I would say young voters right now, young Malay voters right now, are very engaged with social media, and that has ups and downs, right? It's not entirely a good thing in my opinion. Sometimes it can be very topical. So whatever is viral that day or viral that week, then the crowd goes with that. Over time, I think it will settle into some sort of dynamic where young people can both participate in the topical discussions of the day while also having a long-term view. And I think it will be to the benefit of UMNO and Barisan if we can also argue our case in terms of a long-termist outlook, because young people, by definition of being young, they don't only worry about today and tomorrow, they do worry about their young children, and they do worry about and they do imagine a Malaysia in 20 to 30 years time. And I think that's where we have a strength as well.
Much has been said about the young voters. A lot of the parties are saying that they're not sure how the voting trend will be. Johor will be a real testing ground to find out exactly how they would actually vote. But there has also been a lot of consensus that says that for all the things that we have done in trying to get the young voters to come out to vote, they also noticed that there's been a lot of disinterested. There have been pockets of youngsters who says that I'm not interested. Okay, I may not even come out to vote. I mean that what can these politicians do for me? Do you detect this on the ground?
Some. I do detect a certain level of political fatigue among the public in general, and among the young voters, maybe a bit more. And I think that's a challenge to the entire political system. I think it's a reaction to what's occurred over the past few years, where they felt their aspirations and their hopes were frustrated. And not to make this a partisan conversation, but they elected Pakatan Harapan with a lot of hope placed in them. And I think any objective reading of that 22 months will say that Pakatan failed to live up to that promise. So I think a lot of it came from that. There's also the cases of the change in allegiances among so many MPs and so many aduns. That's me being polite lah. There's a different word that can be used for that. but I think you know what I mean. So that that instability also, I think, frustrates them in terms of it goes back to what I said just now about integrity and about standing to the same thing, that you standing by your same principles or your same arguments. Ask people to vote for you under the same flag 2 years ago, then why are you shifting so soon after? So that kind of cynicism, I think, is quite founded. I hope it doesn't last, and I hope that the public and young people realize that who you put in charge matters. And while none of us are perfect, and all of us will disappoint now and then, you know, I'm going to be honest about it. It's not like BN and Umno has never disappointed at all, right? But you still have to, and you still ought to make that choice, and at least have a say in how the country is run in every election cycle. So it's a challenge, but I think the next few weeks as we campaign in Johor, all parties, including mine, and that's what I'm most interested in, is to try and persuade people that while we're not perfect, we're the best choice, and you should make that choice as opposed to leave it to chance.
Obviously, that in Malaysia, there's a trust deficit and a lack of hope for most of Malaysians. They feel that there's no single party or politician, no leader has come up to provide that narrative in the face to say that, look, this is a person to take you forward. That there's been a lot of pessimism. The narrative that's been used by most parties, like for example, for the Barisan, it's always been to provide stability, to provide development. Some would say for race and religion, and then the opposition would say it's to checks and balance. But these are narratives that's been used over and over again. Why do you think that we have not heard any fresh voices or fresh narrative, fresh formula from the politicians?
Because in the past few years, there was, not to say there was no need to, but we were able, and other parties were able to appeal to other things. So when you speak of BN, you are absolutely right that stability is our anchor of our narratives and what we're going to argue in Johor. I don't think I'm giving anything away. It's quite clear already. Even our tagline for Johor has been decided: kestabilan masa depan, a stable future. So that's what we're going for, and that's what I think is important to the public at this point. But very quickly, when I say quickly, I mean in the lead up to GE, even after GE, right? You can't only think of one general election and think that's it. Things move on. We definitely need to really make a strong case for why the future is better with us beyond stability. Stability is the basic, it's the asas, right? And that's what's been missing. So we've been able to appeal, and I think we make no apologies for appealing to that. And I rather appeal to that than just race religion, right? Appeal to stability, and also be aware that very quickly, once you have achieved and proven your ability to be stable and give a stable base, that's not enough. We need to start talking about what our plans are for the next 20 years, what our plans are for the next 5 years even, right? How are we going to govern better beyond being stable? It's not just about being stable, but it's more than that. So to answer your question, why haven't we seen that kind of, really aspirational, hope-driven? I think it's the moment, Dato'. Because of COVID, because of what's happened in politics past few years, people don't really want to listen to that yet, but they will want to listen to it. They will want to listen to it, and that's the role of people like me, I suppose, to appeal to my seniors and the rest in the party. That yes, this narrative works now, this rhetoric of stability works now, but it won't necessarily work in 6 months. It won't necessarily work in a year. COVID's not going to be the same kind of problem, we hope. It'll be endemic, or any number of configurations that will make people go back to the need for higher aspirations beyond just recovering and beyond just being okay. So I guess it's an indictment of our past few years, that stability is what sells. As a young person, young Malaysian, putting away my UMNO and BN hat as well, I would like our politics to go back to a debate and a conversation about the future that's bigger and bolder and riskier, and not just safe.
Correct. Yeah, we cannot have a situation where you have a one-seat majority in the state, or in at the federal level, or where no one is quite sure who is in charge. I think if you're an investor that's going to put money in Malaysia, you want to be very clear, absolutely clear. If I'm going to put billions here, I want to be sure, would the same prime minister still be there? Would the same party be called short?
If I can
right
just
now,
jump
it's
in.
very fragmented. It's ever unsure.
Yeah. If I can just jump in at those three, I think you're absolutely right. And to use the investor analogy, the stability is a basic. And that's where if I'm going to put money in, I have to check that the policies are stable and there's no risk of PM keep changing and minister keep changing and all the rest of it, right? So that's my first criteria. But then I will want to look at what kind of incentives do you give. I will want to look at what kind of commitment has the government given that my industry will be one that is given attention to and given public spending to. I will want to see how confident I am that the kind of fiscal spending that will be required to make my industry grow will happen over the next few years or the next decade. So that's the kind of things that we haven't really spoken about, right? There are big questions that are facing this country that young people ought to, and I'm sure they're very aware, and at some point this will overtake the conversation. Things like what kind of industries and what kind of areas of economic activity do we want to prioritize? Do we have to allow certain sunset industries to go away? And those are big, risky decisions. So that's one example. Another example could be, right, we keep talking about FDI and pulling in investments, but what's our competitive advantage now? What's our appeal? It surely cannot be just that we have cheap labor, or that our land is cheap. So it's not really anymore, right? It has to be something else. Are we having a blueprint or a plan that I can be confident in, that we can become a bit more like Singapore, even if we cannot reach that level in the short term? But what kind of attractiveness will get investors to come in here instead of our friends in Vietnam or Thailand or Indonesia with a far bigger domestic market and lower cost of production? So we cannot be a low cost base of manufacturing or investment destination anymore. So what is our appeal? That set of conversation, I only give you two examples, and there are many others, economic and non-economic, where I would like young people to start giving their input and opinions on, and forcing political parties to make a stand on what these things are, what the answers to these challenges are. Right now, nobody's really having an incentive to talk about it, because we're just speaking and pushing about what we need to solve the basics first, which is the stability and the safe pair of hands that UMNO and BN are.
No, Shahril, that we are going to lose this window of opportunity because most of the other countries have opened up their boundaries. They are resetting and moving forward. For the fact that they got to live with the pandemic, but they're opening up the borders, and that most investors will they will start traveling. They will start traveling, and they will come to see physically at their particular countries they want to put in the money and decide. Do you feel that because we have not settled our political problem, we still don't have a general election, do you fear that we may just lose this opportunity to other countries which don't have this political issue? In Indonesia, everybody knows that Jokowi is in charge. In Malaysia, no one is quite sure who's in charge. And this opportunity may be missed if we do not have a general election soon. And by having a general election, we also want to have a very clear mandate and not be like now. What is your view on that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think one is to say that is to not to lament, but to agree with the picture, part of the picture that you said. Malaysia used to be, one of our attractiveness was that we were politically stable. And that was code for saying we are more stable than our neighbors. I don't now. We can't really say that with any real confidence anymore after what's happened in the past few years, and that's a big regret because only 5 years ago we were still the most, assumed the most stable government country. And to the credit of both sides, after UMNO and BN lost the elections 2018, there was no riot on the streets. The transition of power was done completely peacefully, no real drama. Political drama there will always be, but there was no concern of any coup or anything of that sort. So that was also a moment of pride for Malaysians, I think. But since then, since the aftermath of 2018, I think things have, for various reasons, we've lost that mantle of being the most, one of the most stable countries politically in this region. So I agree that that's a challenge. The panacea though, or the way to fix it, I think, is to get the political parties to really recognize that the terrain has changed. General election will have to happen latest next year. If it happens this year, then it happens this year. So it's coming anyway. I am wary of saying that GE will solve everything, because you never know how the seat allocations will turn out after. I'm hoping that Barisan Nasional wins an absolute majority and that's it, right? But I also am aware of the possibility that there might still have to be some sort of new kind of alliances or old kind of alliances, who knows? What we have to do as a political system is to say, yes, GE is part of the answer, but what happens after is probably more important. We have to come together. If there is a need for some sort of post-election cross-party alliance of some sort, we have to do it better than what we've done this past few years. We have to ensure that that coalition and that alliance can last for 5 years. We have to ensure that that alliance, while we will still perhaps have battles during by-elections and state elections, the understanding and the camaraderie within government has to be done separately or be seen as separate from whatever political skirmishes that we have. So Dato', I think that for me is one part of the conversation we haven't really thought about. Just to be clear, I think yes, a new mandate and all of that, fresh mandate, that would be great, but that's not all of the answer. What happens after? Imagine we have a GE and then after that is a repeat of this, then I think we've
lost the square one.
Then the electorate will be like, wow, I mean, this is then they've lost entire hope to the political system, and our country be the poorer for it, So I think the answer, the question is correct. The answer is a bit more complicated.
Shahril, when a party goes to an election, in this case a Johor election, the party obviously is on the offensive. It cannot be on the defensive. Does with UMNO having some of its leaders tainted with baggages of corruption, does it affect your party in the campaign?
I think our opponents are trying to make it so, and we're doing our best to get people to focus on the issues. None of the individuals that they go after are actually running in Johor. The decision to dissolve the state assembly, while it was done as is fit and proper with the agreement sanction from Majlis Kerja Tinggi, from the Supreme Council, it was essentially a Johor UMNO decision. So that that is something that we've put out there for people to understand. But like I said, is to get the electorate and the people of Johor to quickly look at the issues. And what the issues right here is, how do we get Johor to be one of the most attractive investment destinations in the country again? How do we get the base that Datuk Hasni SMB has done very well? How do we grow from there? How do we make the case that our economic plans and Datuk Hasni's economic plans are far superior than our opponents? And I think in the end, I am quite confident that the public will focus on those issues and make decisions based on those issues. If we win, it will be because of that. If we don't win and don't do so well, it's because of that as well. So I think while our opponents try and obviously understandably go after every angle that they can, I think we've been quite successful in making people see what really matters.
Okay, Shahril, before we wrap this up, can we have one final message from you to the voters of Johor, especially the young voters who will be coming out to vote?
To the voters of Johor, especially young people, number one, say please find it in your heart to go out and make that choice. Whoever you vote for is extremely important for a democracy, for the entire political system, for politicians like me to see that we're still going to be very much held accountable to whatever we say and whatever we do. For young people who are going to be voting for the first time, I say happy voting. This is one of the privileges of living in democracy. And there's some people who say that UMNO and Barisan want a low turnout. That's absolutely not the case. That's not something that we go for. That's not something that I believe in. As somebody who wants to succeed in a democratic space, I will make my case. I will be involved in political skirmishes. I will obviously attack opponents, but it all comes from a good place. And that place is that we want a better Malaysia and a better Johor for you. And please, on the day, do come out and make that choice. And whoever you choose for, make sure it's the best for stability and for the future of Johor.
Thank you, Shahril.
Thank
I
you.
hope to see you in Johor on the ground during the
Definitely.
campaign rounds.
Yes.
And to all viewers, please like and share Shahril and RealChunWai, and please stay with us, because that all eyes will be on Johor, and we will keep our followers updated. Thank you, Shahril, and thank you, Malaysia. Good night.